I'm Kevin Cirilli. I'm Bloomberg's chief Washington correspondent for Bloomberg Television and Radio. I want to thank each of you for being here on this panel on innovation in transportation and infrastructure. Before we begin, I would like each of you to introduce yourselves and who you're representing. We'll start with you.
Sure. I'm Sue Gounder. I'm with the National Governors Association.
Doug Peterson, S&P Global. I'm also a member of the Business Roundtable.
I'm Jeb Takelet. I'm the Chairman and CEO of American Tower Corporation.
Steve Demetrio, Chairman and CEO of Jacobs.
Thank you all for being here. And I want to kind of kick things off with you, Sue, because, you know, we just had a midterm election and now a lot of folks are trying to make the calculus about whether or not infrastructure can actually get done. And so much of the emphasis here in Washington is on the congressional agenda. But really, the main work and innovation is happening, I would argue, maybe I'm a bit biased, at the gubernatorial level.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. There's a lot that can be done and should be done at the congressional level, but we like to remind folks that governors are already getting things done. They're already the ones that are providing infrastructure every day across the country. And in terms of innovation, we just spent the last year talking to governors about being innovation governors, and they are ready for that job. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
What does an innovation governor mean?
Sure. So this last year, we focused on energy and transportation and what the opportunities are there. And it's really about staying ahead of the curve, about helping guide the policies and the programs in their state such that innovation can take hold, working with the private sector. You've got three great representatives here, and thinking about how to use the technology and bring the technology forward that's going to help their citizens and help them create a better life for themselves.
Steve, let me go to you now, because when you hear that from Sue and the importance of public-private partnerships, I think that Jacobs arguably has done a pretty good job at that in particular, especially when you look at something like NASA, for example. Talk to me about your thoughts on that particular partnership and how that plays into this with innovation in both the public and the private spheres.
Yeah, Kevin, it's a great example. We've been at NASA for decades. At all NASA sites, we have about 5,000 employees across the U.S. And if you take NASA Langley, for example, over the last 7 or 8 years, we've been using digital intelligence to make that whole site a smart site. You know, 270 acres, over 200 buildings, underground cable, and we put sensors in, collecting data, analyzing that data with intelligence, and have just transformed that site over the last decade. And we're now taking that capability and bringing it across the domain of life sciences, infrastructure, oil and gas, and doing the same things.
You know, Doug, when I hear that in particular, prior to coming here, I was at the White House covering some representatives from the tech industry, and they're meeting with top administration officials as we speak on the issue of bolstering things like cybersecurity to protect our digital infrastructure. I know that has been crucial for your company, obviously, as well.
Well, when you think about this opportunity to bring new data and analytics to infrastructure, it's one of those where if you go back and you think about the traditional infrastructure, let's just talk about a toll road. You drove up to a toll booth, you handed somebody cash. Just think about the kind of data and analytics you're getting now when you move to an electronic toll delivery system, and some of the new ones.
I can't imagine not using E-ZPass.
And so, but beyond E-ZPass, you're now even eliminating E-ZPass in many places where you just have a reader and you can drive right through. But what kind of information that's going to provide about traffic flow, what times of the day traffic flows, and we're just at the cusp of being able to start using that information to build and design much better infrastructure.
And James, why is that important? I mean, because particularly in the commodity space, for example, I mean, we've seen time and time again just that's the foundation of all of this, but if you don't have the digital backing, if you don't have the innovation moving it forward, then we're really not positioned for the next attack.
That's incredibly insightful. Digital infrastructure and 5G technology is going to be the foundation for providing more innovation and more efficiency to all other types of infrastructure, including roads, airports, et cetera. I'll give you one really quick example of that. One of the first autonomous land vehicle or autonomous truck or car applications is likely to be long-haul trucking. because there's a huge labor cost that can be saved if drivers in long-haul trucks are not restricted by I think it's 8 or so hours a day of actual driving time that they can do.
Wow.
So in theory, think of it this way. If you have the digital infrastructure in place in 5G technology controlling the truck on the highway, once the driver's pulled back from the dock, gotten the truck through the city traffic and onto the freeway, you could drive from New York to LA nonstop with that truck because the system, the intelligence system and technology is eliminating that labor restriction and labor costs. So cheaper transportation and movement of goods, safer roads because the drivers don't get tired on the long haul route. There are so many benefits to these kinds of technology upgrades, but you absolutely need the digital infrastructure.
I mean, you look at these images of the traffic jam. I mean, we've all sat in traffic. It's like the worst. But you look at what's happening in California. You look at what's happening where I grew up outside of Philadelphia. I mean, it's a mess. It's not just potholes anymore either. And so, Sue, come in here. I mean, are the states actually prepared? Because the technology's there, and now it's government that seems, not blaming the governors, but I mean, you know.
Sure. Well, I think it's a really good question and an important challenge because we have a lot of infrastructure that is not in good repair. We know the D+ at best ratings that have come out. And I think the challenge for governors is to think about, if I'm going to fix that or I'm going to think about building something new, how do I make sure I'm future-proofing that so that I'm building in the capability to have the sensors and the communications networks that we're going to need, and even think about, you know, do I need as many roads as I thought I might, or roads in the same places, or parking in particular, because there's going to be so many more autonomous vehicles and, you know, maybe less use of individual vehicles. So I think it's a real challenge. I think governors are up to it. They've been asking these questions. They've been setting up task forces across the country, and I'd say they are at very much the forefront. You've got legislation and executive orders across the country to try to help understand what the issues are and to test out the technologies.
Is the technology, though, is it keeping pace with what the governors need? Or are there anything that could be done to streamline the communication between the tech sectors in particular and the cyber sectors with government? Because I know this as a reporter. I mean, whenever there's an attack or a breach, there's all this headline risk, and no one's talking to each other, and you can't really blame them because there's the communication channels just haven't been open. It's not a Republican problem or a Democrat problem. That's just the facts.
Well, let me just comment on that, but take it a slightly different direction, because the complexity of upgrading our infrastructure, it's going to be the technology, it's applying new techniques to building infrastructure. One of the things that we've found in the research we've been doing the last 5 years is that too many states and municipalities, and as well as the federal government, think about infrastructure as procurement. So in a budgetary sense, they think about it too short term, and really high quality infrastructure, especially incorporating new technology, new materials, et cetera, needs to be thought about as a very long-term investment.
Right.
And built in a way that you funded it for the long term, you're building it for the long term, and sometimes that's more expensive. And you need to think very differently if you're going to build infrastructure, especially with new materials and new technologies, for a much longer period of time. And then what else does that require? Innovative financing. So I think there's
That was my follow-up question.
there's a
How do
lot
you
of
finance
ways.
that?
Yeah, so this is where I'm always also very excited about the governors. There's a lot of action at the level of states, and there's many things we can also do at the federal level. But one of the advantages of the states is that they can have their own P3 laws and their own ways of promoting new approaches to financing, whether it's through concessions, it's ways that you can bring in partnerships, you can do the design, the build, the operate, the transfer approach. So you can do kind of anything along that chain. And so there's been some really interesting projects. As an example, the state or the city courthouse in Long Beach, California, it was built with a 45-year concession. It's built with a very long-term point of view. It was designed, built, financed, operated, and then it will be transferred at the end of the contract. And it is an absolutely gorgeous city hall and courthouse. And you built this kind of a project. So there's projects that we've already seen around the United States that have used very innovative financing structures. And what we need to do is with the governors and the Governors Association, use that as a forum to start transferring those best practices.
Because, go ahead.
Just to add on to that, I think what's really important about that model and combining it with the new technology is the opportunity for the private sector to help bring in their expertise around the technology, because the states may not have that, and help them figure out what the flexibility needs to look like, and absorb a little bit of and share in the risk of
Right.
that new technologies, because that's one of the barriers, is not knowing, where is this technology going, when is the next version of it going to come out, so do I wait till something better comes along, but in the meantime, maybe fall behind. And I think it's the opportunities where government can work with the private sector and together, I think form a better type of approach, and as you said, reform the procurement process overall.
Because there's so much
Kevin, let me
pressure.
just pile on here because I think this is a really important point that other countries around the world have already proven that they can overcome this issue, and so it is a leadership issue, it's a cultural issue, and it's a procurement issue. And there's been studies that show the U.S. infrastructure industry is the most risk averse of all industries trying to
Really?
adopt new technology.
What are some countries that have done a good job of this?
England.
Yep.
We're working with, in London, we've taken anonymized cell phone data, working with the big highways group there, and have used that data to monitor traffic flow and have significantly reduced congestion. And that's just one example. Australia is another great example where they're ahead of the game. So the technology's there. It's more of a culture and a decision to really take some risk with the new technology.
And in the congressional landscape, there have been some, in terms of how to finance some of these infrastructure deals, some lawmakers have discussed adopting the Australian model,
Right.
but where do you foresee that? Do you think that'll get much traction or no?
I think it will.
Yeah.
Look, first of all, we've been talking about governors. I found out just before this, we have 22 new governors in the United States. Great opportunity for that
Yeah.
group of governors to really step up and drive this.
James, but you know what I find really interesting is when we look at, we talked a lot about the financing aspect of this, which is crucial, obviously. But there's also a jobs element. And I think, especially from the political angle, when folks used to hear infrastructure, they thought of, people like my dad who go to the refineries and try to fix the pipe, and they've got the hard hat on and they're going into work. But this is so much different. I mean, this goes beyond just the traditional infrastructure jobs. I mean, it also goes into digital, and that requires, in many ways, investing in education, and we can, not to get off topic, but there's a jobs element here for the nation.
Right. There's a jobs and competitiveness element for this nation. So as I said in the long-haul trucking example, our costs need to be globally competitive in all kinds of industries. Our air traffic control system, whether it's for manned aircraft or unmanned aircraft or drones, or what Dennis Muhlenberger was talking about in the main presentation, which is flying cars starting next year. So the digital infrastructure that enables...
I can't even get my Amazon holiday deliveries on time, but that's another story.
So the transformation of our economy into a safer, more jobs robust, a higher opportunity, and more evenly spread set of opportunities is really part of this. And we should be able to deliver an Amazon box to your house, but why can we not? It's because government and industry and communities haven't gotten together yet. This type of digital transformation takes a whole nother level of cooperation between government, industry, and communities.
Tell me about some of the new technology, the upcoming technology that you're really excited about.
So let's go back to the drone example. Why can't we deliver an Amazon package to your home? Or why can't we transfer medicine urgently needed from one hospital to another hospital? It's because the FAA regulations, and rightly so, prohibit you from flying an autonomous air vehicle or drone outside of your line of sight, then able to control that air vehicle. And we want that. We don't want people letting drones flying all over the place, because they will crash into your house or into you when you go out to get the newspaper if they're not controlled with an artificial intelligence command and control system, because there's no pilot in the drone for the air traffic controller to tell them what to do. This system, which is the only system and a necessary system to support the economic use of drone technology beyond sort of hobby type stuff, needs to be done. You know, it needs to be done in this country just like the air traffic control system needs to be done.
Yeah.
So we have some trials going on with a major defense contractor. The FAA is kind of involved. But this whole notion needs to be brought up to a whole new dimension.
We saw a little bit of it in terms of a couple of months ago when the president had signed with specific regards to bipartisan legislation that had come out, really updating the digital infrastructure for the airline industry. But come in here again, Steve, in terms of what are some of the new technologies that you think, we just heard from James, I mean, that you think really need, that folks in Washington as well as at the governor level need to be thinking about?
Look, there's edge computing, there is artificial intelligence that's getting better. I still think we got a long way to go to get artificial intelligence to where everybody really applies it. But I want to come back and say the technology is there. And even the traditional sensor capabilities of just making that investment. I'll use an example. At Cincinnati, they had a major water overflow problem with the municipal district there. And they were getting ready to spend several $100 million of putting infrastructure in, traditional infrastructure. And we worked with them using digital capabilities, sensors, and taking that information through the cloud network and having a system where they can monitor and control and make 24/7 decisions. They avoided $300 million of capital.
Wow.
And you know, they're applying digital solutions.
And that's a massive example, because I mean, at the end of the day, and I don't think we in the media, to be quite frank with you, are even clearly articulating how this is not just a jobs issue, it's not just a public-private issue, or even, I think we've caught up with the national security element threats, but you're saving money. I mean, you're saving, in that case specifically, you're saving the taxpayer money. And I think for governors in particular, to be able to make that case.
The water example is a great one. I think it's something like 30% of our water in the distribution system leaks out.
Yeah.
And then people think, oh, it's the old pipe. So you look at the age of the pipe and you dig them up. But as it turns out, a large portion of those pipes aren't, it's not about their age, it's about their condition. And now we have the opportunity, and it's starting to take hold, and it needs to be in other places, to actually use AI and sensors and machine learning to figure out what are the pipes that actually need to be repaired. So we're not just digging up needlessly to put in new infrastructure. LED street lighting, which
LEDs
come out,
is
yeah,
another one.
that is, I think, the poster child for an opportunity to bring
Really?
in efficiency, because the LED lights are so much more efficient than the existing technology, and they bring in opportunities for smart and connected applications of all
That's
sorts.
something people can see. That's something that the everyday.
It is, and
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, they see it coming in, and it's a safety issue because the lights are, you know, can be programmed and can be designated for certain zones. You can attach Wi-Fi to it. You can bring the smart and connected pieces into it. You can, in some places, are starting to test out gunshot detection, so you have a faster, quicker way of knowing if a crime took place or a gunshot was fired.
There's that public safety argument.
So public safety as well, and cities and states around the country are starting to adopt this technology. I would love to give a shout out to Illinois. We've worked with them over the past 2 years. They've set out to be the first smart state, and one of the first things they did was look at, to the procurement issue, aggregating and providing a master contract for LED street lighting so that cities across the state could come together, help make those purchases easier. And they've been able to roll out, across the state, new contracts for street lighting that are saving every one of those cities money and providing all the other benefits as
Because
well.
there's literally nothing more annoying than when you're driving at an off-hour time and you're sitting there and you're like, there is no car around, and we all have that thought, should I run the red light or should I not? Of course we don't run the red light, but you have those thoughts, and of course.
Sure, the traffic light management is another piece of it.
But that little episode tells you how far these dominoes can fall. Right? So you set the digital infrastructure policies right, regulation right. The private sector is going to invest in that. Then you get industry with many more capabilities than they ever had. Let's just connect the municipal system to the autonomous car. Well, if the autonomous cars are all providing data as to their speed, location, the system is then routing those cars, and then the lights get synchronized with where the cars are and where they're not. And you will never have to wait at a red light.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Right?
And my Amazon packages will come on time.
Yes, but look at the efficiency drive in the entire economy when you've not got people waiting at red lights or in massive traffic, when deliveries don't get lost or they happen 3 days sooner coast to coast than they otherwise could. These are massive. Every domino that falls has a massive multiplier effect potentially.
And one of the big benefits that we've have mentioned but not directly is climate benefits. Because as you get more efficient infrastructure and you have people in autonomous trucks going across the United States, or you get better traffic management systems, more efficient lights, we can start measuring what is the decrease in the carbon output. What's the decrease in energy? You can also have distributed energy management systems. So there will be definitely environmental impacts. Just think if we could save 30% of the water usage. We're chlorinating our water, and we use chlorinated water to do everything. We use it to water plants, and we use it for washing our dishes, et cetera, et cetera. But we have ways, if we could reduce our water usage, we could reduce our energy usage. These new digital technologies also allow us to have a lower energy impact.
I think back prior to when I covered then candidate Donald Trump embedded with his campaign, I think back to covering the regulatory structure in Washington on the House Financial Services and the Senate Banking. I remember just covering all of these different companies that were experiencing many for the first time in this era, these data breaches, and how a company like Starbucks really educated the public on how to pay for something with their phone. And now we've seen things like these LED streetlights, for example, and what's happening with the water example, really educate the taxpayer on an everyday concrete usage about things much more complex, whether it's what's happening in the airline industry or in autonomous vehicles or in whatnot. I guess when you look at that specifically, though, and you look at the current climate, politically speaking, a lot of folks in the country, they hear things like autonomous vehicles, and they're not hearing the job creation argument. How do we get past that?
Okay, so I want to raise a factor we haven't talked about yet with infrastructure. It kind of gets to your point.
Yeah.
And that is that one of the biggest frustrations in this country for investing in infrastructure is procurement. I'm sorry, not procurement. It's permitting. It's getting the approval to actually start putting a shovel in the ground. And in this country, compared, you were talking about Australia and England, other countries it might take 3 to 5 years. Here it typically takes 8 to 10 years. Sometimes you have to go to a municipality, a state, a county, a government, a federal government, and within the federal government, multiple agencies. Sometimes if it's a bridge, it goes across 2 counties, 2 states, maybe 3 states, depending on where you are.
And by that time, the technology is like...
Technology
there's
has
like
changed.
4 new
And
iPhones.
so
Partners.
and that's one of the areas where you do need to step this up to a higher level. You know, we talked before about the governors have a lot of authority and a lot of ability to get things done, but sometimes even the governors can get hamstrung by federal laws or federal approvals across multiple agencies. And so this is an area we need to get on the table.
And these don't happen in isolation. The segment of, oh, let's introduce technology which will make things more efficient. No, what about jobs? There has to be a parallel reskilling of the workforce. And all of these programs are going to take decades to roll out. They're not going to happen tomorrow. So if we can make an adjustment in training and education for young people in school now to direct them towards more of the STEM type outcomes, because that's in a digital economy, more digitized economy, you're going to need more people with technical skills and computer programming skills. So these things cannot be done in isolation.
I was going to say that's another opportunity for a good sort of public-private partnership, because we don't want the states and the community colleges just kind of dreaming up what are you guys going to need to run your machines and help provide the infrastructure. So where we've seen success is where there's apprenticeship programs or other integrated types of workforce training and education programs that actually build towards the future.
And that success
And
has
just
to
one
be
other
everywhere.
barrier I wanted to introduce, we got permitting and culture, is the fear of cybersecurity attacks. And the more we push connectivity, the more people sort of put the blocks up and say, yeah, but that's going to open up the threat of cybersecurity attacks. And the technology's there now to proactively prevent it. There's predictive cybersecurity analysis that can avoid those issues. And I think if we can overcome those fears, we'll accelerate innovation in infrastructure.
Do you think we're getting to a point, Stu, where we're able to overcome those fears? Or do you think we're still a little bit of a ways off, especially at the state level?
Sure. I mean, I think, every time you hear about a hack or a breach, that just kind of adds to the storyline. I do think it's important here again that folks in government, both federal, DOD and others, and the private sector can figure out how to do the communication and information sharing so that, whatever states can do, they can do on their part. And, some of it is education and making folks aware of what the technology, is capable of.
I want to get to final points, but first, before I do that, I do want to ask you from your perspective on the issue of information sharing.
Yes.
Do you think that that's still trending in the right direction, or from the government at all levels, and where we are today in the private sector?
In the private sector, through organizations like the Business Roundtable,
Yes.
through industry organizations, financial institutions, banking, et cetera, there is definitely a much better environment for information sharing, for being able to go to the FBI or to government organizations to have a clearinghouse, so to speak. But there's still a little bit of a reluctance from organizations to go out and admit if they've had an issue, or maybe not necessarily even know how to confront it. But I am seeing that the willingness and openness of people to share the information is getting better. But the flip side of that is privacy. People are on the other hand, the typical consumer has really changed their attitude about privacy, and what they now realize that they've been giving away a lot of personal information for free. And this becomes potentially one of the risks of some of these systems, that we could get very sophisticated and somebody could say, well, I don't really want somebody to know where I've been driving around. This is a factor we're going to have to think about and layer on top of these broader discussions.
It's really fascinating, especially just to see how all of these constitutional arguments are now being applied to just these burgeoning technologies like artificial intelligence. I want to go around because it sounds like, but I want to end on an innovative note, since this, of course, is an innovative type of discussion about, your final thoughts on where you think this is all headed, but particularly from a job creation standpoint, because I think that so frequently, from my perspective as a journalist covering this current climate, is something that really gets lost. I'll start with you, Steve.
Yeah, so look, I think we're in the very early stages of innovation revolution, and the other part about it is it's going to happen in months and years rather than decades and centuries like other revolutions in the past. But I come back and say that the domain is there ripe for bringing innovation. The technology and tools and capabilities are there. It really becomes a culture and a leadership issue that has to occur. And I think that's what everyone should hold people accountable to, is making sure we overcome those barriers.
And I would add, if the first domino to really get this going is a really robust digital infrastructure, we think it really needs to have two critical characteristics. One is, like software, open source wins. Open source infrastructure, meaning not necessarily for the use of one provider of then services, but open to all providers of services, whether they're startups or whether they're Comcast or AT&T, they're already there. So we want to have a notion in public policy of open source infrastructure, make it widely available, and secondly, make that infrastructure resilient the first time you build it. And resilient, I really mean by including the community and the state in the building of this digital infrastructure, so that whether there's a change in government or a change in party or policy, that infrastructure that has been invested in will survive and grow.
Right.
So we have the notions very simple, open source and resilient. And we've actually worked with government very successfully on the resilient piece, and that was with the FCC. We put in with them a shot clock around the country that allows municipalities to have 60 days, if we're going to put a different installation on a cell phone tower, for example, to give us permission or tell us
Right.
why they don't like it. And if within that 60 days, if they don't act, we get to do it.
Right.
So that just starts early, the conversation between government and industry to do something that works for everyone.
Doug.
To be very brief, we've talked about social infrastructure and economic infrastructure, how it's going to become digitized. We need to move faster. We need to get these approvals in faster.
Okay.
But the last point I want to make is that in all the studies that we've done, every dollar you invest in infrastructure itself is a dollar investment, but there's an incredible additive factor on top of it. The multiplier effect is anywhere from 2.5 to 3.5. That means when you build an airport, you get rental cars around it, you get restaurants, you get new roads. So that dollar you spend in the airport, all of a sudden you get another $3 of investment on the airport. And the economic activity, that's where the jobs come from.
Right, the jobs, right, Sue?
Absolutely, and every governor, that's one of their top priorities. And so I think hand in hand with innovation is the opportunity to develop and create just new opportunities. And I think actually the digital economy can help that. I mean, they may not be the jobs of the past, but there's a great opportunity to create those new types of jobs.
Well, I want to thank each of you for being here. It really is interesting. Maybe next year when we do this, we'll have some flying cars, you know? We'll be doing this up there.
up.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it all.
Thank you.
Yeah.